And welcome back to another Between the Pages book chat. And today our guest is Lindsey Kinsella, and we're here to talk about his book, The Lazarus Taxa, which is a sci-fi time travel book with dinosaurs. So it should be a fun discussion today. And I'm going to turn it over to him now, let him introduce himself. So take it away.
Hi everyone. Yeah, my name is Lindsey Kinsella. I'm author of the Lazarus Taxa. Thank you very much for having me on today. This is my first ever book, um, which I was very excited by. It. I never really planned on becoming an author, and I got the bug somewhat after the first book. So, just very excited to be here.
Okay, so give everyone an interview of the book. An interview. Give everyone an overview of the book and tell us what it's about.
So the Lazarus Taxa follows what is effectively the first ever scientific expedition through time. And the idea being that time travel is a sort of new and untested technology, and it's not very reliable, and it's not necessarily particularly useful as well. So it's about how this new technology is flawed. Um, and yeah, this expedition takes them to the Cretaceous period, 68 million years ago, and it's about how the team cope with being in this new world. As I've said, the time machine isn't super useful. It's clunky. It's industrial. It takes 6 months before it's ready to come back. So the book is predominantly about the team's time in the past and how they cope with that 6 months, and how they cope with each other in a team that they don't necessarily always see eye to eye, and then how they cope with the inherent dangers of being 60 odd million years in the past.
Well, that's kind of interesting because you could actually give a little bit of a parallel to space travel. Um, Space missions on going away and having to stay out for so many months before coming back. It's an interesting idea for time travel.
I think it has a similar notion to it, that feeling of sort of isolation, being far from home, in terms of time rather than space in this particular instance. But I think it has similar connotations to it, and similar feelings of kind of loneliness, and also that kind of dependency on a small, close knit group of people, and a dependency on technology as well, and technology that you perhaps don't entirely trust. So I think there's certainly some parallels with old school, space sci-fi. I think something like Alien kind of springs to mind with that vibe.
I was thinking something along the lines of The Martian, you know, as well. Because I
Yeah.
mean, so what were your reasons and inspirations for writing the book?
It kind of started out for the subject material. So for as long as I can remember, I've been a huge kind of paleontology geek, and I think I craved an outlet for that, and then I sort of craved this storytelling outlet as well. And so yeah, the original concept came from you know having a desire to get those things out of my brain, you know. Um, and yeah, it just kind of grew from there. Like I said, I began writing during COVID, when we were on lockdown. I didn't really expect it to be anything more than just passing the time. Um, but it took on a life of its own, and before I knew it, I had an entire novel there, ready to publish. So yeah, it was a kind of strange beginning for me.
I don't know. Actually, a lot of new writers I've been interviewing lately have said that they started during COVID. So I think we have that to blame for a lot of new books.
Well, I suppose that we all had nothing but free time for a year, more than a year.
Yeah.
So that makes sense, I think.
So all the closet writers came out of the closet during COVID.
Closet authors.
Yeah. Okay. So are there any themes that run through the book?
Yeah, I think we kind of look at really how technology would be abused, particularly by those with power and those with money. And I think that's similar to any technology, really, but it's looking at how something as powerful as time travel would be treated by people while acknowledging that people are flawed and greedy and selfish without necessarily being evil or terrible people. Just people are inherently flawed. And so what we have is a cast of characters who are kind of all in a certain way vying to take full advantage of this, powerful new technology, but often at the expense of others. So it's kind of an exploration of advancements in technology, I suppose, sort of capitalism and corporate greed in a way. It's sort of a mishmash of those themes, which sounds really unoriginal now that I say them out loud. But
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the characters. Do we have a main protagonist, or is it more of a group ensemble?
yeah, so we have sort of a halfway house, but we do have a main protagonist who is a field engineer called Sid. Um, Sid, I always thought was an interesting character on the basis that being the main protagonist, he had to be sort of likable and relatable, but at the same time, for the purposes of the story, he had to be kind of unlikable. He's quite a flawed character. He's highly ambitious, but overly ambitious. He's quite brash. It can be quite rude, and I think that was one of the challenges of writing the book, was to write a character who was all those things, or at least in the beginning, because it had to grow and it had to show some development throughout the story, but while also not making the reader dislike the main protagonist. Um, and Sid's main sort of motivation throughout the book is kind of fame and money. He just sees it as an opportunity to, become famous, to prove to people that he's good enough. But then that kind of stems from his kind of insecurities, and I think that's how we sort of bring it back round and relate then to Sid, because we see that it's his deep rooted insecurities that cause these behaviours, and you kind of sympathise a little.
Okay, so we have a marketing question from the audience, so we're going to ask you, put you on the spot here for a little bit. He says that you have a good amount of reviews on the book, and she wants to know, did you do anything specific to get those reviews, or was it just hitting a niche market?
Um, that's hard to say. So in terms of specifically getting reviews, I did send out free copies of the book to a few kind of reviewers, but I'd say that only counts for maybe two or three of them. I think predominantly Facebook marketing is actually what's been the biggest benefit there. Certainly, the vast majority of my sales have come through my Facebook page, or not directly, but as use that as a sort of marketing tool. So I think that's really been a springboard for the reviews, is just having lots of people read it, but having lots of people being engaged with directly, people that I speak with and engage with. So they sort of feel a personal connection a little, I suppose. And I think that makes people more likely to want to leave you a review. But that's a theory. I don't know. I would have to ask everyone who reviewed.
I think getting people engaged with you as an author and is a good marketing strategy, and people do love dinosaurs. So
That is true, and I think it is quite a niche market as well. And certainly, there are sort of two traditional markets for that book. There is the sci-fi novel reader market, but there's also a market of just paleontology and dinosaur enthusiasts who form quite a large basis of my sort of following. So I think there's an element of it being a niche market as well.
yeah, well, Shannon says thank you. So
You're very welcome.
all right, so What was the hardest scene or type of scene for you to write in the book?
The hardest scene, on the basis that I rewrote it about 7 different times, was the first chapter where we meet Sid. Um, that was a very difficult chapter because I felt like I had to communicate so much about the character, but I had to also do it while keeping it sort of fast paced and exciting, because this is only the second chapter into the book, so you don't want to lose the reader already. And so what I finally settled on is a sort of mountaineering expedition gone wrong. So we have Sid and his mountaineering companion, battling the weather, eventually battling the authorities. He ends the chapter in jail. I think that was a very difficult chapter. I had to show that he was ambitious. I had to show that he was rebellious. I had to also sort of show that he had sort of contempt for authority. And to wrap that all up into a single chapter was really quite difficult. I'm quite pleased with how that ended up. I think the finished product of that chapter is good. I won't have to rewrite it an 8th time, which is a benefit.
Well, it sounds like a very exciting chapter. You have mountaineering and authorities and him ending up in jail. It sounds like a great way to start the book. Okay, so what was your favorite scene or type of scene that you wrote in the book?
I think there are one or two, but I think the one that doesn't provide too many spoilers. There's a scene in the book which I think is the closest the book gets to sort of horror. There's a chapter where effectively our group of characters have to escape some bad weather, and they find themselves in a cave, and it's nighttime. They're stranded there, and it soon becomes apparent that they're not alone within this cave, and that was a really fun chapter to write. We have this sort of complete darkness, so it was how do we describe this situation effectively without using a lot of vision. Had to use a lot of sounds and smells and touch. So I think that was one of the more interesting chapters to write. Just on it being quite challenging, but I think it turned out really well.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about some of the secondary characters. Are any of them stand out and sort of vie for the main character position?
So our sort of expedition team consists of 4 team members, said to be in one of them. I think who you would class as sort of the secondary character is a woman called Diane, and she's the team's paleontologist. So she's there to provide expertise on the local wildlife, and she's in many ways the complete opposite of Sid. She's not in it for recognition or money or fame. She's in it through a pure kind of almost childlike fascination with what she does. But with that comes a sort of naivety as well. So whereas Sid's very cynical, Diane's really quite naive. But there's an interesting relationship between those two where they're so very different, but yet they kind of that naivety and that eagerness to please and eagerness to prove himself, that kind of comes together, and equally means that they can both be quite reckless, even if for very different reasons. So you find that these two characters who get on actually really well, but are probably a really bad influence on one another. And I think that was the most fun character dynamic that I had written in the book, was those two very different characters getting on. As a more sort of antagonistic role, we then had Alexei, who was sort of staunch by the rules. He's the security guy. He's military background. He's by the book, and so naturally, those characters very much clash. And it was interesting to have that conflict between those sort of wild characters, and this very by the book character who is effectively in charge. And our last character is our scientist, Kiara. And she's sort of quiet and reserved, and I don't want to give too much away, but she's not letting on all that she knows.
Oh, so there's secrets to be had.
There are secrets to be had. There are.
Okay, so is there a main antagonist, or is it more of them against the sort of elements?
There are sort of several antagonists. It becomes quite tricky to discuss antagonists because, in many ways, the existence of most of them sort of is a solution to some of the mystery elements within the book. So it's difficult to discuss those without, spoiling the plot, if you like. But I think crucially, the antagonists are people rather than the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs are there. The dinosaurs are dangerous, sure, but they're not the bad guys. They're not the antagonists. Think that's all I can say on that front.
Well, I think that's very tantalizing. So yeah. Okay, so you obviously write in sci-fi time travel, and this is your first books. But are there any other genres you want to try in future?
Yes, I'm actually currently trying my hand at some fantasy. So I'm hoping to have that book released sort of beginning of next year. I'd love to try my hand at some horror as well. I sort of grew up reading horror. Some of the earliest books that I remember, really loving were sort of, classic Stephen King, things like that. So I would love to try my hand at some horror. I think that would be fun.
I write horror, and it's a lot of fun. So
Yeah. Well, like I say, I mean, some of the favourite parts within the Lazarus Taxa, from a writer's perspective, the bits that I really enjoyed writing were some of the more horror orientated moments. I love, the dinosaurs are. I made a point not to treat them as monsters as such, but they're still frightening, and it's still frightening situations, and sort of kind of trying to draw the reader into those was really some of the more interesting moments in the book, and some of the moments that readers have come back to me and said, I really like this chapter, which says to me that perhaps an entire horror book might be something that I could do well.
okay, so I think we'll wrap it up there, and I'll let you tell everyone where they can find you and your book.
Yep, so you can find myself predominantly on Facebook, Lindsey Kinsella, the Lazarus Taxa. You'll also find me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok with much smaller followings, but I'm on there. As for the book, it is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Google Play, and I think that's it.
Okay, so I have the book and the Amazon page linked in the description on YouTube. On Facebook, they changed it up on us, and it's now an event. So you can find the description in the event on Facebook, and I've also added it to some of the shares that I did, and it's in the comments on my Facebook page if you want the link for any of this. So yeah, thank you, Facebook, for making my life harder. So anyway, I'd also like to thank you for joining us as a guest today. It was a pleasure chatting with you. Your book sounds fascinating.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be on.
Okay, and Between the Pages will not be back next week because it's the Thanksgiving holiday in Canada. But we will be back the following week on Saturday, not Sunday, to wrap up the October Frights blog hop with a special interview. And please join us then. So that's all for now. Bye.